Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. My name's Keely Severson from Exposing Mold, and today I'm going to talk about hidden ways that mold can affect relationships. This is more of the social construct side of how mold is affecting our interpersonal relationships in many ways that I believe can go undetected or under the radar, because mold illness is such a stealth illness. It can make you sick without you even knowing, and it can cause severe disruption in your life without you ever knowing what hit you. And I often think about this, like how many people, this is a little, hits home a little bit. Sorry. I often think about I don't know. Jeez, I'm so sorry. How many people have had their lives torn upside down from this and never knew what hit them? So I want to talk about two of the mechanisms behind what I think is happening here in the effects of relationships. The two main aspects that I think are occurring with hurting relationships are the idea that mold can behave as a nerve agent and cause an anticholinergic response in the body, meaning it can really disrupt the nervous system and it can cause symptoms of mold rage or manic behavior or intense personality changes, as well as the brain damage that does occur from a toxic mold exposure. When we talked to Dr. David Ross in Virginia, he explained to us that a mold exposure does cause a traumatic brain injury, and these brain injuries can induce increased volume of different areas of the brain. And the leading theory between the brain volume increase is brain swelling, but it's not completely determined what is happening with the swelling, if it's like liver or lymph fluid backing up into the brain, or if it's other fluid retention causing the swelling. But we can see in brain scans that any area of the brain can change. And I once came across a really interesting study that showed how changes in the size of the amygdala can create more narcissistic personalities. And that really got me thinking with some of the emotional abuse that people who suffer with mold illness endure. So the first way that mold exposure can affect families and relationships is lack of support from loved ones. Because this illness is not well understood by Western medicine, a lot of times we don't get validation from our medical team. And because it's not a widely accepted illness, when we cling to the idea that no, this is actually what's happening with our illness, we sometimes look crazy to our family because we don't have that validation from mainstream medicine. And it can be really hard for your family to believe you. And when you don't have any family support because they don't believe in what you're going through, that is a hidden way that causes so much harm beyond the health effects of what we're already experiencing. And I think at least part of what's happening there is the other family members, maybe they're also affected in ways that they don't know, because people can be like really cold, unconnected, and aggressive when they're exposed. So they might not have the illness symptoms that you do, but they might have personality changes from brain changes that are making them literally less compassionate. And the lack of support from loved ones and the isolation that comes from that is as painful as any other symptom of this illness. It really leaves people in a bad spot to be all on their own. The second way that I was not expecting to like have such a hard time with this one. Whew. The second way that my voice is quivering. The second way that mold illness affects relationships that people don't really talk about is the abuse and trauma that can happen in a water damaged home. I will say this: exposure to mold can cause trauma, but trauma does not cause mold illness. And I think a lot of people grew up in water damaged buildings and they had parents who were behaving in ways that were maybe outside of who they really were because of brain changes and exposure to a nerve agent. And this can make people become like verbally or emotionally or even physically abusive. And that can be a very traumatic experience for people to have to endure, to be abused. No, you can't eat on the couch, but you can eat at the table, and you have food on the table. Thank you. When I think about the kids who have behavioral disorders from exposure, like ADD or more aggressive behavior, or even like some of the PANS kids and the PANDAS kids that are going undiagnosed or maybe even diagnosed, the exposure can make the kids more aggressive to the point where they're overly disciplined. And I think that can border on abuse, like emotional abuse towards kids, because they have a medical condition that's being treated as a behavioral choice, and that's not the case. And I think parents, because they can also be affected and not know, they can just become less compassionate and more cold. And I think that can cause a pretty severe injury, especially to a developing child. Also, when people are mold raging, a lot of volatile things can happen. And this is where I tie in exposure to a nerve agent and changes in the brain, because I think oftentimes people are acting outside of how they would act or how they would be able to behave if they were not exposed to a toxin that was really pulling the strings on their brain and their personality. And I think that there are a lot of ways that these toxins are pulling strings on our brains and on our personalities that are going undetected. And unless you're like totally clear and out of it, you might not ever like return to your previous state. And I think that can be really traumatic. The third way that mold can affect our relationships is just by not being validated by mainstream medicine. That makes you look crazy to your family. It makes you look crazy to your friends. If they haven't, some of this stuff with mold illness is so crazy that if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to believe. And I think when it's not recognized by Western medicine and there's no test to prove the level of severe injury that we have endured, and there's no medicine to bring relief, it's like, well, is this all in your head? And when people start posturing towards you from a position of thinking that your illness is in your head, that's going to really affect your relationship a lot. The fourth way that I see mold illness affecting relationships and family is through addictions. I think a lot of addictions are rooted in mold exposures. I think that there are a lot of people that are self-medicating because they're desperate to feel better and because they're not getting answers from anywhere. And I think it's really easy to resort to alcohol abuse or even something more severe when you are so desperate to take the edge off of how you're feeling. And I also think some of like the alcohol cravings are actually like a direct symptom of something like candida overgrowing in your gut. I mean, it's kind of common knowledge that, you know, the organisms in your gut will help dictate your cravings. And so if your immune system is suppressed to where candida can overgrow, you might crave more things like wine or beer, like yeast brewed beverages. Also, mold exposure as a nerve agent, really messing with the ion channels and the nerve impulses. Alcohol dampens the nerve impulses. So it physically takes the edge off when someone is exposed to a nerve agent and they're feeling really on edge from that exposure. Alcohol literally can dampen that nerve impulse. I mean, that's how it slows our reaction times. And I think people just are so desperate to take that edge off when they are exposed that it can lead to using alcohol regularly in a way that becomes dependent because you're so desperately trying to self-medicate and you're not getting answers anywhere. Another weird thing about alcohol is that it's literally fungal urine. So that's disgusting to drink fungal urine. It's definitely not going to help anyone's health or thinking clearly, but I definitely understand needing to take the edge off in an exposure. And I do wonder if, because alcohol is a metabolite of fungi, if that has anything to do with like the cravings. But I really feel like a big aspect of it is taking the edge off the nerve impulses that make you feel really highly on edge. The fifth way that I believe mold exposure can hurt families is I believe that it causes a lot of divorces. And I also believe that there's people who are divorced who from an exposure who think that they got divorced because their partner was just turned into an awful person. Well, did their personality change because they were exposed to a nerve agent and they got brain damage and they had brain changes? Because that's very likely. Failed remediation, I think, puts people at a really high risk for divorce, because if you have a sick family member, like a spouse who wants to do a certain repair, and they call some random company, come fix the mold, and this company is one of the 99% of scam companies out there, and the company says, oh sure, we can come fog with A, B, and C, and it'll take care of everything right in the walls, you guys will be great. Okay, well, when everyone's not great, because that's absolutely not going to work, what's going to happen? One spouse is going to resent the other spouse for wasting the money. It's going to be further verification in someone's mind, possibly, that this person obviously is like crazy or delusional because this treatment that they were guaranteed by a professional was going to work doesn't work. And they're exposed to nerve agents. And they're at a higher risk for probably having a substance abuse issue. So if you're living in mold and your relationships are being affected by lack of support, possibly a method of abuse, declining health, and possibly addictions, like that's not a recipe for a healthy, happy marriage. I think these are these are the social aspects of how mold can impact families in a way that's not discussed, in a way that's not known, because you can see on every list of symptoms that, people make these lists and they're like, here's the 3,000 ways that you could have symptoms, but nobody's talking about the personal relationship aspect and how that's disrupted. And for me, my health, I mean, I almost died. I think if I would have stayed in my moldy rental for another year, I would have had a cardiac or a blood clotting event, like a heart attack or a stroke. I wasn't in a good space. But more than that, more than my health hurting me, the dysfunction in my family from everyone being sick and angry and having out of control behavior caused a lot more pain. And this is what I see in the community. I see people not being believed by their doctors. I see people not supported by their family. I see relationships ending in divorce. And I think this is the reality, and this is the consequence of this illness not being understood and the scams that are happening in the industry. That is why Exposing Mold spends so much time talking about the failures in mold testing, the failures in remediation, the way that this changes the brain, the way that this behaves as a nerve agent, because we don't want to see people's lives completely destroyed by this. And I think it's so prevalent. I often wonder how many kids in moldy schools are having like behavioral problems or ADD problems that the parents think are like behavioral issues or mental health issues when they're exposed either at home or at school. This is something that I'm really passionate about shining a light to, because I think that it hurts a lot of people. So I would really appreciate anyone who shared this video with someone who could use it. And if you want to connect with us more, to talk to us, our team, more about these things, we're always available for consults. We have our Patreon education group. We're going to be expanding the use of our Patreon education group very soon. It's soon going to have a Patreon level that includes a monthly consult. So if you just want someone to talk to once a month or support once a month, to check in once a month to see where you're at, it's going to be a lot more of a manageable price point. And it will be tax deductible because we are a charity. So you can contact me directly if you'd like to join that. I can walk you through that. And if you have any questions about what I've shared here, please feel free to leave a comment, and I will do my best to get through answering them. I know today's topic was really grim, and a lot about this illness is not a happily ever after situation. It's not. The doctors who come on here and they're like 10 binders to take for all your molds, they're not being honest with you. They're not. Because the effects of this last far beyond toxins being binded out. The effects of this can live with you past the half-life of the toxins in your system. If you are suffering with mold rage, we have an herbal product that has 3 species of Ceanothus and Ocotillo, which are all lymphatic herbs. They're all raw extracted. It's a very powerful lymphatic cleanse, and it takes the edge off of mold rage when you're in it. It is not a cure for mold illness. It is not a substitute for learning mold avoidance, but it's a lifeline in a sea of chaos. I had 2 years where I really depended on that for maintenance while I was still in mold. Um, it helped regulate my blood flow, which had become very clotted. And I think that blood clotting plays a really big role in our mental health. In Chinese medicine, blood stasis can cause a lot of emotional dysfunction symptoms, and we're seeing that pair up with the clots that are being caused from mold exposure, with the rouleau effect of microclots from a nerve agent exposure. So that, I don't know if that's available on our online store, but if it's not, you can just message me and I can ship it to you. Also, our Patreon group that has like the level that has consults, that level also has steep discounts for our herbal products. We really want to make things affordable for people because we know that financial limitations are a big part of this aspect, which was behind the choice to make this a public charity instead of a business. Nina Cools, who are you? Where do I get it? My name is Keely Severson. I am the founder and president of Exposing Mold, which is a nonprofit. The product that I'm talking about is, you can just message me for it. It's an herbal product that I put together based on things that I tried and things that worked for me and my experience with mold rage. It reduces mold rage by quite a bit. It does not eliminate it completely, but it can bring you from like a level 10 or a level 9 to a level 2 or a 3, and it can improve your quality of life. Lisa Light says, thank you so much. I'm going to share this with my family. Good. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. So I think that about wraps up what I wanted to cover. Sorry, I was a blubbery and emotional mess. As you can tell, this hits really close to home for me because these were a lot of things that I dealt with personally. And I didn't know what was going on or what was wrong or why I couldn't get a grip on things or why I felt like my life was falling apart. And it's like there's this hidden monster under your floor and you don't even know that it's trying to kill you and destroy your life. And it's like, how many other people have these issues that they think are something else because it's not a typical mold symptom? Or how many people's lives have already been in upheaval over this and they never even knew the name of their enemy? So I think it's important for people to know. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you all next week. Take care.